Hi, this is Clara, and you're watching Books and Questions, and today I wanted to share about one of my favorite classes from this fall semester. It was a small class, only about 8 people total, and nearly every week we had a guest expert come in and speak to us about their work with the arts. The first thing we read was a book called What Good Are the Arts by John Carey. I don't necessarily recommend the book, but it definitely got our conversation started. His idea of what the arts are is extremely broad and makes their significance seem completely subjective, which is a little hard when you're hoping to have reasons to fund the arts, for instance. So we started with that, and then we went on to talking about bibliotherapy and the ways in which reading or prescribing a book or sort of a bout of poetry can affect your emotional or even physical well-being. The first visiting expert we had to come in was Michael Silverman, who is a music therapist. He teaches music therapy at the University of Minnesota, which is where we're all taking this class, but he also is a practicing therapist. So he talked with us about his work with young children with autism or other disabilities, or children who are not able to walk or speak, and the ways in which music is able to help them. He also talked about his work with people recovering in substance abuse ward in a hospital. Often these patients don't want to go to therapy under normal circumstances, but it's music therapy. If they're discussing their feelings about the White Stripes lyrics, sometimes it's a little easier to get through and a lot more productive. So it was fabulous class and really exciting work to get a peek into. One of the doctoral students here in the English department is doing work with prison Shakespeare and looking at the social phenomenon of teaching and performing Shakespeare in prisons, and what does that do for the inmates, and what does that do to the society, and why would we do this, and does it work? And some of the research shows that it is extremely effective for reasons that are still sort of being parsed. People who participate in these programs are much less likely to become incarcerated again. After they leave on parole or whatever, they're much less likely to wind up back in prison again. So that's been fascinating. The next speaker we had was another professor here at the University of Minnesota, and he focuses on children's and young adult fiction. He was looking at speculative YA fiction and a longing for justice. So by speculative young adult fiction, he's looking at anything that's not mimetic, anything that's not realistic or historical fiction, whether it's dystopian or fantasy or sci-fi. He was looking at those genres as a way of looking at different types of justice and the way in which young people particularly have this longing for a just world. How that longing for justice in literature can shape our future. How his lecture was so good that I think more than half of our class signed up for his course on speculative fiction this spring, so I'm super excited for that class as well. We had 2 different speakers come in and talk to us about the medical humanities. So this is the ways in which literature and the arts are used both for doctors and for patients for their health and well-being. A lot of this work had to do with the Mayo Clinic, which is a pretty phenomenal medical institution where they have musicians who come around and perform for the people in their hospital beds. They have arts classes for long-term patients. And they also talked about the ways in which in the medical school at the University of Minnesota, there's grants available and classes specifically for medical students to get them in touch with their sort of human empathetic side so that they can be better doctors and so that they don't burn out as easily. We looked a little bit at literature and cognitive science, what we know about how the brain reacts to reading, and is there actually a scientific claim for reading increases empathy, or does it depend what you read, or how good the literature is, or how emotional the literature is, and is it different for romance novels than it is for reading sci-fi or whatever. And that was really interesting and a little bit depressing because it's still so hard to know. You can see correlation, but it's very difficult to say causation at this point. So it's still a like opening field in the cognitive science. And the last topic we had in our class was theater and social change. And oh my goodness, it was a wonderful class. The professor who came and spoke to us about that was speaking of her time working with children in refugee camps. So there were like Syrian refugee children that she was working with so that they could sort of tell their own story in a way that was meaningful to them. And then they could use that as like a piece that they've like a work of art that they've created and then can go and perform for the camps. It was just beautiful and fascinating and really exciting. Another example we were reading about and that she was talking about was use of theater as like a rehearsal for social change in like mediations in the Gaza Strip. How especially like children and young people can be brought to imagine each other's experiences through acting out different roles. And that was amazing to hear about and really exciting, especially given at least the political climate in the US right now, that through the arts there can be like real and meaningful social action. So that was really exciting. I was so glad to be part of this class, and I'm excited to see more about how we'll start answering these questions in the future. I am curious to know if you've had any particularly exciting classes on similar themes, or if you've read books about any of this stuff. Do you have books that you like about the importance of the arts, or are there books that make you excited to change the world? Let me know in the comments.